So we're talking a little bit about the materials appropriate, the woods that are appropriate for doing a laser woodcut. This is an example of a woodcut that was cut on a piece of wood with the laser. You can see the halftone pattern that it created, and then it was rolled up with ink just like a regular wood block and printed on a piece of paper. So you can see right off the bat some different types of wood that I have here. I'll tell you that through experimentation, I have found that obviously different woods work better for woodcut. Some work better for etching and creating that sort of burned look. But if your ultimate goal is to create the wood block, then I suggest using a harder wood, such as, this is maple. Nothing too hard like cherry, or you'll end up needing to maybe go multiple times through your etching process, and it'll take longer. This is also an appropriate piece of birch. You can find these at the hardware store if you go to, or like a lumber yard that has fine woods, better quality woods. You don't want to get pine. It's super soft. It has a lot of knots in it. You're going to have problems with pine. I would get something without any knots, because you don't want to have that hard. Knots are very hard and they will interrupt your etch and actually not etch all the way deeply that you want. So find a piece, take your time, find a piece that doesn't have a lot of knots. And then, of course, go the extra mile and do tests. So I'll show you, just talk about some examples of this, I'll talk about some examples of what worked and what didn't. So in this case, this is a maple, but I didn't really etch it deep enough, and you can see kind of that it's pretty shallow. It's only like, I don't know, 1 millimeter down. And it worked, but it didn't get all this detail that I wanted to, because as I rolled my brayer across it, it picked up some of that part that should have been etched out. So having a test is a really good idea. Make sure that your settings on your laser are correct so that you don't do your whole project and then realize you have to do it again because it didn't etch deep enough or it etched too much. And in this case, you can see that it got way too deep. This board is much softer than the maple, and even if these might not have been the same settings, but it could have likely been the same settings. And you can just see how it totally obliterated a lot of that design because it was just too high a setting and the wood was too soft. So again, test, 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 and then keep your tests. And right on the back, this one has what the settings were, whether it was the speed and the power, so that you know, oh, I can go back, and if I'm using the same type of wood, maybe write what type of wood it is, whether it was a vector or a bitmap or a raster. You should be able to tell that, though, from the image. So record your tests on your little test blocks. If it's too soft, it's going to just over etch and you'll lose all your detail. Might even go all the way through. So make sure that you note your settings when you're cutting before you cut for your appropriate wood. I would not recommend using OSB. This is that press board, because it has glue in it and it definitely won't get an even look, because there's too much going on here, too many different woods, too many thicknesses. It's not going to etch cleanly. So just like avoiding knots, avoid things that have a lot of different types of materials mixed in them. You can seal your wood prior to cutting, but I would make sure to seal it with a appropriate sealer like shellac or like an acrylic sealant. That way it's not going to, and then let it fully dry, because you don't want the alcohol in the shellac to start a fire in your laser. You want to make sure that it's totally dry before you stick it under the heat of the laser. But it really helps to prevent the ink from soaking into the wood. You can certainly seal it afterwards, but it might fill in some of the finer details. So coating it first before you put it in the laser is sometimes a good idea. But if you forget, you can always coat it afterwards. Spray it with an acrylic sealer or a shellac. Another type of wood that's pretty good is plywood. This is a birch plywood, and because the etching isn't going too deep, you can see that this is a pretty good depth. It's about 3 millimeters, and it will get a nice roll for you. You don't go too far into the plywood, so you don't have to worry about the glues and the different wood qualities in a plywood. But again, make sure you get the carpenter grade because you want to ensure that there's no knots and everything is as even as possible. You can easily clean this off, the soot off from the laser afterwards, but if you are worried about it, you can lay a piece of paper tape or contact paper over the top before you cut and then peel it off, but you will have to peel off all those little details that were left stuck on there. But if you're just going to be inking it up for a woodcut, then it's pretty easy to just clean it off with a soft brush, toothbrush, or a rag and a little bit of like oil, baby oil, and you should be good to go. If you're wondering or if you're confused about the types of appropriate wood, again, just do a test, figure out whether you're on the right track or you should start over and look for something else. But that should give you a good start as to choosing your woods for your laser woodcut.